This is the Bricks and Bleachers podcast, all things Chicago Cubs in under 10 minutes. The moves have been made. The team is a lot different than this time 1 week ago. We will recap all of the Cubs' moves at the trade deadline, preview the final 2 months of the season, and have an early look at 2022. Monday was an off day for the Chicago Cubs. Team is currently 51-56, fourth place in the National League Central, 13 games behind Milwaukee. An emotional few days for the club and its fans, as the core of the roster the last several years has been deconstructed. Lineup Wednesday night against the Reds looked familiar, and then Anthony Rizzo and Kris Bryant were held out of the lineup on Thursday, and you knew the moves were imminent. A few hours after Thursday afternoon's contest, Anthony Rizzo was traded to the Yankees. Also, in a separate move, Ryan Tepera being moved to the Chicago White Sox. Both trades bringing back prospects you and I probably have not heard of. On Friday, the actual trade deadline, the moves continued with Craig Kimbrel being moved to the White Sox for second baseman Nick Madrigal and relief pitcher Cody Hoyer. Javi Baez and Trevor Williams ending up with the New York Mets, and Kris Bryant being sent to the San Francisco Giants. Those moves yielding prospects. And not to get lost in the shuffle, but Jake Marisnick was also traded. He ended up in San Diego, also in exchange for a prospect. So at first glance, it is tough to be excited for a roster full of guys you've not heard of. Kimbrel move brought a couple of big league guys to the Cubs. That was pretty much it in terms of guys who can make an impact anytime soon. Nick Madrigal, I'm pretty excited about, but he's out for the rest of the year with a hamstring injury. I'm excited by this pickup. He was drafted by the Sox, fourth overall in 2018. He made his debut last year, missed a couple of weeks with a shoulder injury, and then this year he played well and left in early June, I think it was, with a hamstring injury that ended his 2021 season. But in the time, both this season and last, that he was on the field, he established himself as one who can hit for average. I'm excited to see him and Nico Hoerner up the middle for the Cubs next year. That's assuming that Nico will be moving over to short. Someone's going to have to move over to short, unless Nico would possibly be moved into the outfield. I think they've talked about Nico playing in the outfield before. They'll work it out. Remember, the Cubs had a bunch of shortstops a few years ago, and then more recently, they've had a bunch of third basemen. Now, the deal that sent Baez and Williams to the Mets is also exciting, I think, because it brought back a prospect named Pete Crow Armstrong. He is a first-round pick of the Mets last year. There was talk the Cubs were going to draft him last year. They did not, but now they have him with this trade with the Mets. May or may not hit for a lot of power. You'll see conflicting reports online about that, but is someone who should be able to take the leadoff or number 2 spot in the order. I think in these moves, you see the Cubs acknowledging the issue that they've had with the offense in recent years, really since Dexter Fowler left. No great contact hitter on a consistent basis. So I think they're trying to bring in a couple of guys with potential to be 300 hitters. We're not going to see what will come from the other prospects in the various trades, probably for a couple of years. You're talking 2023, because maybe there was a prospect or two at AA, but we're all talking about single A guys at this point. So they're nowhere close to joining the Chicago Ball Club. But even if you can get one or two of these guys to work out, to really pop, I think that's going to be good for the Cubs. Again, this wasn't a salary dump. You're just trying to restock the farm system and hope that you can fill a spot on the Chicago roster in the next couple of years, as opposed to keeping all the guys and letting them all walk. I think 2022, the team can still be competitive in the division. I think 2023, they can certainly be competitive in the majors. But again, so much will happen between now and then, including what's left of this year and next. There's no way around it. The rest of this year is going to be tough. 55 games to go. Wilson Contreras is really the main guy in the order who's going to be recognizable to casual Cubs fans. If this weekend in D.C. is an example of what to expect, looks like Patrick Wisdom is going to be the starting first baseman from here on out. Nico Hoerner at short, or at second base, I should say, but he's on the 10-day injured list again. He injured himself last week against Cincinnati, but I think Nico will eventually end up at second base again for the rest of the year. Sergio Alcantara at short and Matt Duffy at third. Outfield from left to right, you've got Ian Happ, Rafael Ortega, and Jason Hayward. David Bodie still around. He'll probably get plenty of playing time as well. And, Happ, Bodie, and Wisdom can all play various positions. I think it'll also be interesting to see fan response to this team that's not playing for anything in September. What's attendance going to look like for these meaningless games in mid-September at Wrigley? I hope, or at least I'm curious, to see one of these guys step up, put together a nice 60-game run here to end the season. Cubs should have plenty of payroll to score some nice pickups in free agency. This will be a test of whether or not the Ricketts family will invest in the product on the field, or if they're only interested in investing in stadium and neighborhood improvement projects that we've seen them do in recent years. Also, not much being said about this, but the collective bargaining agreement between the players and owners expires at the end of the season. 1, will the two sides reach agreement to avoid impacts to next season, including spring training? And 2, what will that new agreement look like in terms of revenue for owners? Will they suddenly have more cash to spend on free agents and draft picks and everything? Another aspect I think that's worth watching is how do the now former Cubs, like Rizzo, Baez, and Bryant, fare on their new teams? Rizzo has slumped most of this season. Baez has seen his strikeouts go up. I believe he's leading the league in strikeouts. And he's even had a decline on defense, while Chris Bryant has gone ice cold in June and July. So if those three guys magically turn it around the final 2 months of this season, what does that say about David Ross and his managerial future? Here's a guy who came in with no managerial experience. He was close to these guys. It was expected he could use his relationship and familiarity to help coach up these guys. And then they all have slumps. So if they go somewhere else, change of environment, new management, and they start playing well, what does that say about David Ross and his future in Chicago? All right, this and that. News and notes from around the league. Max Scherzer and Trey Turner traded from the Nationals to the Dodgers. That was a big blockbuster on Friday. So many moves made at the deadline, certainly unlike anything we've seen before. Joey Gallo and Anthony Rizzo both going to the Yankees, bolstering their postseason odds. Braves added a handful of outfielders, including Jock Peterson a few weeks ago. White Sox with bullpen adds. I think you'll see Houston and Chicago in the American League Championship Series, and the Dodgers and Giants in the National League. Non-trade news, Toronto Blue Jays back to playing at home in Toronto. Border restrictions loosened, and that allowed them to return home over the weekend for their first actual home games since 2019. Baltimore Orioles, with one of the worst records in the majors, looked impressive last night. They pulled off a stunning feat, 4 home runs in the span of 6 batters. And yes, they did get the win last night. And the Mets decided to pass on their 10th overall pick from the draft a few weeks ago. Team reportedly not satisfied with medical information discovered on Kumar Rocker and chose not to make him an offer. So the Mets will end up with the 11th overall pick next season as compensation. It's not something you see it often, but it does happen from time to time. It's how the Astros landed Alex Bregman and Toronto drafted Marcus Stroman, both via compensatory picks a year after the team chose not to sign their original first-round pick. All right, back to the Cubs. They dropped 2 of 3 over the weekend in Washington, both teams in liquidation mode. A lot of changes to both rosters. And as mentioned previously, it's amazing the Cubs could keep the core intact for as long as they have. We're talking 5 years removed from the World Series, and the Cubs are really just now dismantling. You'll look at the Nationals, they're only 2 years out, and they are now solidly in rebuild mode as well. But for the actual action on the field, Cubs dropped a close one Friday night that featured Jake Arrieta's return to the rotation. Kyle Hendricks was off to a shaky start Saturday, but settled in for a nice 7-inning effort as the Cubs won. Rafael Ortega with 3 home runs for the Cubs on Sunday, but a walk-off home run by Yadiel Hernandez resulted in a 6-5 Cubs loss. Off day yesterday. Now the Cubs are on the road in Denver for 3 with the Colorado Rockies. They struggle when they leave Wrigley. They have the best home record in the National League Central, but struggle on the road. Davies, Mills, and Arrieta expected to be the starters for the Cubs in this midweek series against the Rockies. Cubs are 51-56. Rockies come in with a 46-60 record. Cubs will host the White Sox for 3 this weekend, and then 4 with Milwaukee at Wrigley next week. By the way, the Sunday game with the White Sox is Sunday Night Baseball, and for the first time, it will be exclusively on ABC. No ESPN, just ABC, still at 7 Eastern. And we are out of time. You are all caught up with roster moves, the recap of the weekend, and a look ahead. Wherever you get your podcasts, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode of the Bricks and Bleachers podcast.